Welcome, everyone. It's Gerald Clark with 7 Planet Broadcasting. It's November 30th, 2018. And again, I'm honored to have as a guest and dialoguee Julian Polzin. And we're going to talk about, I guess you could say slavery, a little extension on some dialogues we've been having. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So say hello to everyone, Julian.
Hi, guys.
Yeah. So hey, you're starting to put together quite a lot of videos on YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen them are really great, and people are liking them. So why don't you put a plug out right now before somebody watches this and goes, "Oh, I'm going to get to the end, and not watch anymore." But let them know that you've got a presence.
To the name, you'll find everything. Because I made everything under the same name, so it's not complicated.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
There are actually quite some people who commented under my videos, "I'm here because I saw you on Gerald Clark's YouTube channel."
Well, good. Well, good. You know, there's a lot of people that are running into areas in their life that what you're offering is a perfect solution for them, especially if they can have remote online access to the stuff you're doing, the stuff you're aggregating in videos. You know, it's very helpful, and you can point them to that stuff. So it's good.
Well, it directly points to the topic of today, because slavery is something that has to do with psychological control mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, in order to be enslaved, someone in a sense needs to offer you a belief system where you feel unworthy, where you feel incomplete, where you, let's say, are being offered identity. And once you, in a sense, start integrating this identity, and it kind of works like this. Let's say as a child, when you get born, you have a certain spectrum of behavior, right? You just act it out naturally, innocently, right? But then people within a certain belief system, they start judging. So the interesting thing that happens when certain behaviors that we are expressing are being judged, we experience pain, we experience disconnection. So then we start learning to adapt, because as a child, we want to survive, we want to live, we want to be loved, right? So in order to avoid the pain, suddenly the child learns, oh, if I behave in a certain way, I can avoid the pain and I get attention. So the interesting thing is, then the child that is intelligent enough plays a role. And this is what we call the ego. The interesting thing is, when this role is being played long enough, think of an actor that is in a movie but forgets that he is the actor. He believes the movie is real. So if as a child you have learned to play a certain role, let's say you are a son of a family of lawyers, and you learn very quickly, I'm only loved if I inspire to be a lawyer. Then even though if it is against your deepest intuitive being, you still try to be that lawyer, be in conflict with your deeper self, and as such, as long as you play it long enough, you will at a certain point think, I am that, right? And you only notice that you're not that because you will be neurotic as a side effect of suppressing your deeper self. But the reason why we suppress our deeper self, why we do not choose to become spiritual, because we are afraid of punishment. And this punishment is being conditioned into us since we're very little. We are in a absolutely not creative school system, for example, right? So creative, intuitive people, they have no way of expressing themselves in the school system. They're just supposed to memorize, repeat. Creative thinking is not supported. So in a sense, we do not learn from early on to express our intuitive being. It's the opposite. We're being punished for expressing this. And then we have the belief from early childhood, if I express my true self, I get punished. So then we hold on to the ego, which is the role that we have been playing since a kid in order to survive, right? So once we figure that out, and we have some sort of spiritual realization, for example, through yoga practice, through meditation, and we realize ourselves beyond the body to some degree, then we can transcend the role we have been playing and undo the conditioning. So slavery is a relationship that relies on fear on both ends. The controller needs to be in fear, and those who are being controlled are equally in fear. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's what you're describing is a system of control, which I absolutely agree that once you have established the boundaries and say, okay, this is the box you get to play in, that those are the kind of systems that also keep people in the system, but it's not obvious to them. It's not open to them. It's done through the media. It's done subtly. It's not like guards standing around and like, okay, back in your cage until you're ready to come out and do more, road work for us or whatever, right? It's not that obvious. And part of that is because if you give the populace the ability to choose which role they get to play in the simulator, right, then they have the perception that they're free because they got to choose that. But they're still part of that same system that they don't really realize is serving ends. It's far beyond anything they could imagine, actually. Colonization of another planet, and you're a very small part of it as a hybridized pawn that's doing your little task, and you have no idea the full connection of what labors you're doing versus the means you get to sustain yourself and where it all comes from. So this whole system of slavery started a long time ago, and I think I took it back to even the idea of a hybridizing of a species in order to do your bidding on another planet as you're colonizing it, which clearly is what some of the advanced alien races have been doing for thousands and thousands of years, not just on planet Earth and Mars, but all over our galaxy and many other galaxies as well. It's just, it's a resource trade. It's like the Dutch East India Company on steroids, because it's all over the galaxy, right? Mm-hmm. With sponsorships to go get and alliances to shore up certain resources that they want, whether it's unobtainium or anti-gravitum or whatever you want to call it that they're after, okay? And, the Earth has some of that. So as part of slavery, I went back to the idea, I said, so, what better way to take over a planet than to hybridize if there's life forms there that might be in opposition to you or possibly benefit to you, what better way than to hybridize them so that slowly your introduced genetics take over that populace from the inside and slowly convert them to what you want versus go to war and just wipe them out, because then you've got nothing to work with at all. Well, this apparently, for most more advanced species, from the threat briefing document, this is exactly how they operate. So I started by saying, okay, well, let's go back to the Atrahasis, because 220,000 years ago in the Sumerian documents, they say that's what happened. Mm-hmm. Is a hybridization of early bipedal hominids with the Anunnaki race themselves, and they name names. So ultimately, those workers they created are us. And that's kind of where we fast forward. So since our very inception as a genetic species, we were designed for slavery.
Well, here's something that is very tricky, mm-hmm. and this is identity. See, you're speaking about a narrative right now, and that narrative is important. I do understand the importance of narratives. On the other hand, narratives are often a trap, because what we need to learn to discern, in a sense, is, let's say, things that happen in a simulator. Let's say there's a log, there's a history of what happened in the simulator, and who we truly are. Because if I take this game as my identity, then I'm lost. Well, because, so to speak, if I think I'm Julian the human, mm-hmm. this is my physical body, this is who I am. I have memory since being 4 or 5 years old, which of course is not the truth. I have memory that is way, way older than this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But let's say most people only have access to memory when they were 4 or 5 years old. So
Mm-hmm.
then there's a narrative in the mind, and this narrative consists of a chronological idea of time. You go from A to B to C to D.
Mm-hmm.
But since we know in meditative states that there is no time, there's just this infinite present moment, and within this infinite present moment exists the illusion of time. Everything is simultaneous.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that's very tough to wrap your head around this, because you can't. Right, this is something that we only learn through direct experience, not through rational thought.
Right.
So when we learn our identity is not the role that we play in the simulator, then we can be fearless and start transcending it. Regaining the memory is significant, though, because it shows us that there is a cosmological scale of events. That means if we pick an identity, at least come to an understanding that we have a cosmological identity and not one, I am this human sitting here, going to work in the morning, sitting in my cubicle, paying my mortgage. This is not who we are. This is a role being played, right?
Well,
so
even go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So what I'm trying to say, if I believe this role, if I believe this act that I have been playing, I start identifying with it, and everything that starts threatening my role, I suddenly see as a threat to my life. Therefore, I can be controlled, because I think, let's say, under the conditioning, I am this role that I'm playing. Mm-hmm. I'm so-and-so, this is my office, this is where I go to, this is my boss who pushes me around. This is the ego story in the mind.
Sure.
When in truth, all of it is an act. And the liberation ultimately that we're looking for is, in a sense, it's not in thinking, for example, that there is a clear evil out there, because there is no evil. In a sense, it's highly complex. All forms of relationships are highly complex. And what I liked when you spoke about the whole Anunnaki story, start revealing it, that even within other societies, obviously, there are highly complex differences in perspective and experience. So many of these beings that choose to incarnate on Earth, some in a sense have a selfish agenda, some have a selfless agenda, right? So in a sense, not to be caught up in ideas of good and evil, because then we get into a mindset of conflict. And this is exactly what feeds the simulation, the mindset of conflict.
Well, I think part of it is part of the instruction, is that the roles that they play, it doesn't matter if we were the Anunnaki's hybrid or somebody else's hybrid, or it doesn't really matter genetically where we came from. The reality is the energy that animates us is from the creator of all. You know it, and I know it, and they knew it too. So iteratively, if you were to, so let's go back to the issue of them enslaving you as a hybrid, and then we'll talk about the more modern aspects of what you're talking about in our culture. Is if they left within us the ability to access the chakras, the biological features that we know where the finite meets the infinite, and awaken ourselves, they've essentially put you in a prison because you're kind of in a barbaric state to start with, by intention, by material design, in the lowest level of the school of materialism, right? You've fallen all the way down the hill of universal consciousness, right? Near at the bottom. Well, probably not even with speech or writing at this level. These were the hairy barbarians that Thoth met. Well, at this place, I think in order to have a common experience, that we all essentially start out with that consciousness as we're young. If you think about how susceptible we are to everything until you come to a place where your consciousness is even at a modicum where it can understand what's going on, you are susceptible to any schemes and machinations by a more advanced species. I mean, it's unbelievable how simple we are from that standpoint. Okay, we're still at the, I don't know, monkey see, monkey do a lot by what we see on TV. That's what we do. I mean, really, that's true. So suppose they left these capabilities within us to access this higher state. So in their minds, they temporarily enslaved a species that got jump-started millions of years by doing what they did. And by the way, we wouldn't be sitting here having a conversation at all if they hadn't done what they did. This is kind of the paradox of it all.
Right.
Right. So you can hate your creators like the Frankenstein story, right? Or you can see the archetypal roles that each of them played, which was very interesting, because then as their children, you could look, it's like your parents go, okay, well, this one was the war god, and this one was the god of the sea, and that one was the cat god that just jumped on your shoulder, and all that. Okay, and if I played that role through this life as an avatar, because we know it's all an act, would I be fulfilling whatever mission was given to me by my higher self to come here and have this experience in the first place? That's a good question to ask yourself. Okay, because ultimately this will establish the next deeper part about what I wrote about the screenplay, was the idea of relationship in slavery. Okay, but before we do that, you gotta bring up that picture if you can, with the meme on it that talked about humans being enslaved, or I can probably find it. Do you have that one?
You can check on Instagram, on my Instagram there. It's probably right there.
Oh, actually, I think I might have it more accessible if I had to go online to get it. With my modem speed, it probably wouldn't be very good. So let me see if I got it here. Anyway, that I think it's important that meme you brought up, we talk about that. I don't have it here. I thought I had it readily available. Anyway, do you remember what it said, basically?
I have it right here.
Okay.
Here's the question: how I bring it on screen.
Oh, you can just hit share at the bottom there. Say it's set up so anybody can share. See, there's a share button at the bottom of your screen. You see that? And open your picture on the. And then you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bildschirm freigeben.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
it says in German. That's why I was confused for that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Here it comes. Yeah. There we go. Okay.
That?
Why don't you read it real quick, or you want me to?
How can I move this? Yeah. Is that clear?
Oh, it's very clear. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay. In truth, humans cannot be enslaved. You can only allow yourself to be enslaved by your own fear. Systems do not control you, but your belief in fear does. Ultimately, there's nothing to be afraid of. You are eternal, and the world is a playful illusion. Even if your body fades, the world fades, and the cosmos ceases to exist, you will still be there. Since you might not know this as a fact yet, and you might have been indoctrinated into a belief system that consists of ideas of shame, fear, guilt, sin, and unworthiness to keep the power within inaccessible to you, you experience the illusion of separation from your own power. Only those without fear can realize the eternal self. Everything that traps you is illusion and is sustained by your belief in it. Drop all your beliefs and face the mystery, then you will find the immortal self, and from the power within your heart, your connection with the core self, you will know love as the only reality. Julian Polzin. Okay, so you can turn the share off, I guess, now that it's.
Yeah. This is all fairly new to me. I'm trying to figure it out without postponing so much.
Oh, that's okay.
Beautiful conversation.
So I wanted to have a conversation about that, because I agree with a large part of it. Let's see, it's not on sharing. Okay.
Is it back to regular now?
No, not yet. I got well, maybe it's my screen. I have this funny, no, I don't think it's back to regular yet.
Well, we can just cut it after the show.
Okay. Let's see.
Otherwise, it's too much for the too much downtime.
Let's see. That's good. Well, I can cut this out.
Here says stop. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. Hey, okay. So,
all right. Problem solved.
So with that said, basically what it said to me was, you can't be enslaved unless you allow yourself to live in fear. It was the bottom line. And my thought with that was, and it brought up this great movie that you and I talked about, we've both seen, was Conan the Barbarian, where as a child, and a lot of the movies today use this something terrible happened to you as a child, you carry this revenge your whole life, and then you get satisfaction, right? Well, this was kind of one of them, except it encoded a lot of esoteric stuff in there. But the idea that a child, and this goes back to Dostoevsky, the idea that something that we view as evil that could happen to an innocent child, how can you have a system of belief that supports that? So here, Conan is a small child, his parents are killed in front of him, and he's taken into actual slavery conditions in chains and put into the pit to be a pit fighter. At what point did his belief system enslave him? Before he was incarnated? Because he was young when they took him. So you see what I'm saying? So how does that work?
Well, see, it's not that we're not susceptible to conditioning, right? So, and I think this is a great case that you bring up here, because as a child, there was no way, in a sense, that he could physically fight it off. Right? There's no way that he could have had any form of resistance. Right. But let's say when he is enslaved, what happens is he spends a lot of time with that culture. Yeah. So in a sense, he learns from that culture, and this forms his identity. Right. So what we're seeing is that at a certain point, you see, he comes into power. Yeah. He realizes that he's powerful, and he starts resisting. But at first, in a sense, you need to let go of that identity. So what happens to many of us, we don't realize that we're powerful because we believe the identity that we have been integrating as memory into our brains since we were little. So let's say as a child, you have some intuitive knowledge. Yeah, there are, for example, some children, they have abilities. Yeah, I sometimes have this in psychotherapy. They see things and say things that come very natural to them. But of course, the grown-ups with their conditioned ego and feel threatened by that, right? So in a sense, then the conditioning starts. Yeah. Oh, you're believing all that. That is all illusion. Yeah, you're just a cog in the machine. You're this, you're that, right? So and from that moment on, we do not know that we're powerful. Yeah, this is what we have forgotten. It's not that the child has the ability to resist, because a child does not have the ability to resist.
I think that was symbolic, because like we were talking about before, I think we all start out at a low level of consciousness unless you bring your memory forward in a reincarnation. That causes you to start out essentially being like Conan. You weren't taken by force, though. See, this is the difference I was trying to point out. There is slavery that's forced that you didn't allow, okay? But it may not be permanent, because at some point you have the ability to resist, usually at the expense of your own life, depending on the severity of the slavery system. Right. Or you know. So, but I think if you go to Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, in that book, he was enslaved in a prisoner of war camp during the war in I think it was Vietnam, and spent many years there.
Oh no, it was actually Nazi Germany.
Oh, it was World War II. Yeah, Viktor Frankl.
And his whole family was gassed.
And the idea that he found freedom in prison agrees with what you're saying, because it's not necessarily physical incarceration that has to do with the slavery. It has to do with your belief system, and I know you get that. So you could come into a slave system that you were born into, but you weren't actually the one that was taken out of the little village and brought in first. Okay, that's kind of the situation the modern world is in, unless you live in Mogadishu today, like what's going on there. You know, so So there's different aspects and ranges of slavery, everything from a chain gang that busts rocks, you know, with no freedom, to those that live in a box that was created for them long ago, that as long as you don't transgress the boundaries, whether it's a country boundary, political boundary, or whatever it be that upsets the system, then you're allowed to operate right? With this perceived sense of freedom.
Right. So there are two very important points that you made. And when we think of slavery, for example, there are, let's say, some of the most documented cases of slavery were, for example, ancient Greece, Rome, yeah, then this the slave trade triangle, yeah, with Britain, Africa, right.
Portugal, and Spain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, there are very blunt methods of slavery, and this is like you're being captured in a physical manner. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're being put in a cage, you're being chained up. But this is not the type of modern slavery that we speak of.
Right.
Right.
I wanted to distinguish those because
exactly
there are still places on this planet where people are physically being incarcerated and enslaved.
Yes. And this is, of course, this is a different type of slavery. So it's important that we make that distinction. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In order to be compassionate, in order to understand that a little kid that is being put in chains, we don't point the finger and says, well, don't you realize you're powerful, right? In that moment, there is an experience of a very strong physical limitation, which for many is, of course, traumatic. So, but let's say the modern slavery that we speak of is more sophisticated, is media-based, is conditioning-based. So in a sense, you're being put under the illusion of not being able to resist the system. Mm-hmm. And you believe that illusion. Therefore, transformation does not occur. And now you spoke about freedom and liberation. And here's the deal. This is what I meant about game rules or the simulator. If you draw your identity from the simulator, then you cannot truly be liberated. Because when you have not realized the spiritual levels of who you are, then when you draw identity from the simulator, you identify with the suffering. Mm-hmm. You identify with threats to your life, right? And I give you a story that I find very powerful. This is a story that Ram Dass used to tell to Terence McKenna, actually, in a conversation. It was very beautiful. There was in China, there was a warlord who ran around and he was killing Buddhist monks for fun, so to say. So he came to a village and there was a well-known monastery. All the Buddhist monks fled except one. Yeah, the warlord was outraged, went to the monastery, ran up to the monk and said, "Don't you know who I am? I'm going to run you through with this sword without even blinking." And the monk responds, "Don't you know who I am? You can run this sword through me and I won't even blink." So what I'm trying to say, if your point of identification is the physical body and your localized memory, what do I mean by localized memory? Is the memory of your current personality, which is a tiny, tiny fraction of who you actually are. Then this is, in a sense, what you think of as I. This is me. This is what you're thinking. So when someone is threatening that I, suddenly, if you identify with it, they can control you. Because self-preservation kicks in, right?
Right.
But if I know myself beyond this physical body, because, for example, through meditation, I had the experience of accessing memory that was in another frequency, in another dimensional layer that is not bound to my brain, and I could access that, then I know when this brain dies, my memory persists. So my consciousness persists.
Right. So you realize you're an infinite energy being, and at the tip of the sword, this knowing, okay, if you truly know it and feel it, this is what gave the Christians the courage in the Lions arena in Rome when they said, I'm not even going to blink. You can consume me. You can destroy my body because it's not even me. And I know because I've had the experience that it's not me. And I exist in an infinite realm of intelligent energy from the creator of all. That should be our focus point. If you can figure that out, it gets rid of fear. And you pointed that out in your meme, that you can't find that place. You can't find that place at the tip of the sword or the other end of tear gas or a water cannon. You can't find that place. okay, if you still identify with the meat as you.
Right.
And the meat has a story because it went through these experiences that create your ego. That's not you. Those are just the lumps and bruises of a material school that you're supposed to be learning from.
All right.
The infinite you, right?
So let's speak about something very powerful then.
Okay.
Many know the scholar and researcher about mysticism, right? Joseph Campbell, great writer. Some people know his work, Hero's Journey, right? And one of his more famous students was George Lucas, and he was writing Star Wars based on Joseph Campbell's ideas. And now let me ask you the simple question: what would Star Wars be without Darth Vader?
Well, because we lost our connection to our spiritual self, such that we created the duality, the inside us, and then there's that outside, must be God, right? The duality, that we had to have a dark and a light. So Star Wars wouldn't be anything. We wouldn't get the archetypal roles without the dark and the light. We created.
Exactly. And this is my point here. This is what I say to transcend the idea of good and evil. The idea of good and evil is one that comes from illusion, and the Buddhists would call it Maya. That means you buy into the identity of the simulator, the identity that you draw from the simulator.
Well, isn't that easy though? When you're born into it, and your whole generations before you have been in it, you've been trained. You know, the Bible even says, teach your children in the way they should go, and they will not soon depart from it. Right.
Okay.
Well, so you got brainwashed when you're a kid, when you're most susceptible, and it keeps perpetuating. So you can't hold it. How do you hold anybody responsible for the intense belief system that's been imposed on them? They're all cultures, not just one.
Let's say this. You know that the simulator is there for consciousness to know itself, right?
Exactly.
So how does Luke Skywalker know himself? He knows himself through Darth Vader. So this is powerful, because what we perceive as evil, what we perceive as an opposite, is also part of the playful energy in order so we can know ourselves. So this knowing of self is not possible as long as we exclude what we perceive as evil. See, the idea of evil comes from a limited perception. When you speak about the whole complexity of alien colonization, right? There is so much knowledge and spiritual accessibility that is there that without that story wouldn't be there. See, Gerald Clark knows Gerald Clark through researching the Anunnaki story. See, what I'm trying to say is, in order to have a story, in order to have an experience, we need polarities. And it's profoundly important that we stop to make enemies of those polarities, but instead learn to integrate them. And then we find, for example, as a way, because before you brought up the British Empire, where you said the West Indian Company, right? So
Dutch East India, yeah.
All right. Yeah, but let's say it was a similar thing as a technological superior culture starts colonizing other cultures, right? Why could, in the end, India free itself from British rule? Because they were so spiritually rooted that they could, in a sense, resist the British by walking into their clubs, by being hit by them, by being shot, because they knew our identity is not of the physical. So that was powerful, because what we call evil has also a unique perspective, and within their belief system, they are convinced they are correct. Yeah. So you could, for example, see in the Anunnaki story, if there was a very dangerous crisis on Nibiru, they felt justified in colonizing Earth and taking the gold. Right.
Basically.
Right?
And other planets too, sure.
Right. So the British colonizing India also in some way would rationalize it that they would colonize India. So we would create illusion to justify our identity, to justify our abuse, to justify why we exercise power over others.
Exactly.
Now the interesting thing is, if they don't fit our belief system, that, for example, when the very powerful, spiritually powerful Indian culture started resisting peacefully, there was no enemy to fight. There were no barbarians to fight. So at a certain point, as a soldier, when you trained or indoctrinated, you're supposed to defend your motherland, you're supposed to defend resources and whatever. You're supposed to fight an enemy, but there is no enemy to fight. Your ego identity cannot be upheld. It starts shattering.
Right.
And this is what Gandhi understood. That is powerful. This is the transformation that we're looking for, the peaceful transformation. See, if we embrace mysticism, not institutionalized religion, but any form of method that gives us direct access to the mystical experience, that means meditation, psychedelics, past life regression hypnosis, and on a wide scale, people start having those experiences. The system itself is transformed. That is powerful.
I agree, but that means a lot of people gotta turn off Netflix and go in the closet and meet their real selves and face those dark shadows. And a lot of people, even in this Masters of the Far East book, they were having direct experience with some of the most profound masters and such, yet still there were people that would not sign up to do the work to get what they had, and they would just fall by the wayside, you know. And one distinction they made in there that I really think is important is when you do get to the place where you've busted your ego and your soul has returned to the source of where you'll know it, because you'll be asked to serve humanity. You'll be in service to humanity if your soul is at a place where you're back in connection with the Creator that is using you in some way for the good, if you still believe in good and bad. But there's uses for good and bad, but there's a large agenda, which is the evolution of human consciousness as a species. And sometimes it takes good, sometimes it takes bad, sometimes it takes creation, sometimes it takes destruction. And actually, Enki himself from the Anunnaki mentioned that they'd created and destroyed many civilizations. And when you look into what he's saying, was each one was a life lesson in how if this population groups together and has this belief system, this is what the outcome will be. So you get all these models to look at of civilizations like we have now, right, through the internet, where you can go, well, look, here's what happened in Greece when they believe this, and here's what happened over in Afghanistan when they believe this, and gosh, look what they believed in Atlantis and what happened there. So so part of this creation and destruction of culture was for us in the big drama play to try on these archetypal roles, not even as an individual, but as a populace, a large group of people to try this experiment on. So we've been in a simulator all along in terms of waking up to higher levels of consciousness, and who knows how many levels there are. But one thing I would say is from the Masters of the Far East, he was discussing the limitations that we have in our lives that we have to strive to overcome to keep progressing in our spiritual path. Because he said if there was no impediments and you got satiated and happy, you wouldn't be trying anymore to get and find that place where you have that connection with the source of the Creator of all, so that you're in a personal relationship with it and you're an agent of change or whatever the Creator wants you to do at that point, and you're not in your own way, because the ego will bust that quickly. Like trying to be an agent of a spiritual movement with your ego involved, it won't go very far.
Right. Well, the thing that we're speaking of is ultimately it's about transmutation or transformation of energies. See, good and evil are labels, and these labels come from our subjective, limited perspective. So, because we cannot see the full complexity from the perspective of a person, this is impossible. Information is infinite. A limited human brain has no chance of processing this. But since you call the human body a meat modem, it can receive that information from another source and have it explained to you, basically. Right? So transformation of energy is what it is about. And I give you a simple example. someone I know recently had an issues with people being unfriendly. Yeah, so going somewhere, having to do something, bureaucracy, paperwork, whatever, and it was, people are always unfriendly to me. I'm so angry, they're always unfriendly. And I said, right, and then the person thinks, oh, there's constantly opportunity to get mad. When I said that is interesting, because what I see is a constant opportunity for you to learn forgiveness. Forgive those people. See, the universe, in a sense, gives us externally what is within ourselves. And the interesting thing about it is, as long as that is unconscious within ourselves, then we think we are a victim to the experience, but actually we are creating the experience, but we're not knowing that we're doing it. So if someone gives us a certain belief system, we're also creating that experience. See, when communists thought that they were more woke than capitalists, what happened? A tremendous amount of violence, because a belief system was created. This was en masse projected onto the world, and this resulted in tremendous form of violence, right? So as long as we do not understand that we create this reality with our state of consciousness, we feel ourselves as victim to the experience, and the ego can say, I'm not responsible.
Right.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that, and this is something that Carl Gustav Jung explained, right? The great psychologist, who was also very definitely a mystic, yeah? Which became more clearer in his writings later in life. He gave the best explanation for karma I've ever heard. And what he said, as long as you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate. So as long as there's the shadow within yourself, that means the painful memories, the things that we did, for example, in other incarnations, the people we've hurt and so on, and we are in denial of that energy, we suddenly find it projected outwards and people mistreat us. Or we get in conflicts because we're not willing to look into the shadow. So instead of finding, let's say, the controller outside of us, it's the same thing as looking for the external God, is giving away responsibility. Nobody can take our responsibility for the evolution of our own consciousness.
I want to add something right there. Wow, unless I'm interrupting you. If I'm interrupting
sure, go for it. Go for it.
The idea that, well, let's see, where did I want to go with this? Oh, I lost my train of thought. I had something really good for you queued up there, but continue on. You were on a thread there. I shouldn't have said anything, but I was like, wow, you're like right on an exact thread that I'm thinking right now that had to do with, oh, it must have been removed from my consciousness for some reason because it was really good. Go on for a second.
All right.
I'm having a brain block here. Must need more coffee.
Just relax. It might come back when you don't think about it.
Yeah. Oh man, that was a good one though. There was something. Oh, I think I know what it was. So there's this. So there's this place where we somehow lose this connection with the source of all of it, and this has to do with. Now imagine when you get inspired. Okay, you get this idea. You're trying to do something and make this real. And we never stop to think about each thought that we have that somehow creates our reality. So some of that I was like, oh, I got this idea and I want to do this. Okay. Well, the thought that I had this thought and I'm going to do this, you've already kind of stepped on it, okay, in terms of an ego position, okay? And this has to do with the nature of a thought. We know that the brain produces an electromagnetic signal that we can measure on an EEG. Okay, very small. We know what the frequencies are. And what we don't realize is, in analogy, that a thought is like electromagnetic signal, and it can travel all through the galaxy. Okay, so here's a great analogy that I was thinking of. In this story I was reading, this woman took a pebble and said, well, I'm going to drop this pebble in the water, and at the impact point, clearly there's going to be a concentric series of waves that are traveling out to some boundary, and depending on what I have it in, if it's a circular ball, it's going to hit those circular boundaries and then turn around, come back to the center. Consider this, that every time you have a thought, every single thought has a meat modem, that you're transmitting that signal, just like dropping a pebble into the electromagnetic spectrum. It travels out to a certain place, and during the delay, when it basically hits some ionic or electromagnetic boundary where it might bounce back, or material form, or what have you, when it starts coming back, essentially you can think of it like running an idea up a flagpole. It aggregates everything relative to that thought, and then it comes back to you and manifests your reality. It might be a little delayed relative to when you see it. And this goes back to the Mayan calendar, where they said as you reach the top level of the Zolkin calendar, that every 20 days when you have a thought, it'll be in manifestation, versus how it used to be a long period between your thoughts and manifestation happening, so you could tell that you were in control of your reality.
Right.
So
that's right. And this is the reason why a lot of people don't realize it, because it has to do with your energetic state. If you're in a low energetic state, the manifestation is so delayed that you do not see, in a sense, that you are causing it. We believe
right.
in a
right.
Newtonian universe, yeah, where, let's say, billiard ball A hits billiard ball B, right, and objects hit other objects and move. When in truth, in a sense, this is something that I also experienced in meditation, where there was communication with some teachers of mine, where they told me very clearly, Julian, you need to stop believing in cause and effect. Because effect and, in a sense, cause and effect are one. This is very profoundly to understand. In Zen, there is the saying, no outside, no inside. You, like, from the subjective perspective of the ego, yeah, when you identified with the physical form, you think you stop where your skin ends. Yeah, but
right.
So as such, there is the idea, I'm in this form right now, and everything outside is other. But when in truth you are an energy form that you currently are not able to perceive, yeah, if you haven't had that experience yet,
right.
And everything you think up, this energy form, in a sense, creates it. So for most people, that is very delayed, so they don't know that they're creating it, because they are in a low frequency state. When you get into higher frequency states, by clearing out, let's say, the shadow parts of you, it's the painful memory that you have not accepted. And I will be utterly honest when it comes to that. I have past life memories of killing people, of murdering people, and so on. Yeah, because I want to make clear that those people who are awakening are not better than those people out there. They're just more aware. Yeah, they know that they were ignorant. And we know that ignorance leads to confusion, and confusion leads to fear, and this leads to violence. This is what happens. If you don't know who you are, if you're an Alzheimer patient on planet Earth, you're confused, you're scared. And you might think that mate is stealing from you, or the neighbor comes to kill you, you shoot them on the door because you're confused. So the thing is, when we realize, and we do this when we reach higher frequency stages, because then suddenly synchronicity is an event for us. Suddenly we think something up, and next day we experience a manifestation that directly relates to what we have been thinking. And it becomes so instantaneous and so in such a repetition that at a certain point it is beyond doubt, but it's very difficult to explain it to people who haven't experienced it.
But that's happening to you, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Pretty rapidly. Yeah, it's been happening to me. It seemed to really start in the year 2000, and it just accelerated from there. I don't know really exactly why. It's just crazy. I blamed it on the Zolkin calendar, actually, because I could tell that my thoughts were manifesting my reality. And the farther along you go, I don't know why there is such a delay for people in lower chakras. I'm not sure why. Maybe to make it more mysterious in the game, that there is an internal locus of control, and then there's the external, so you can have play the victim. I'm not sure why that is, but as you go along further, when you get to the place where you see everything coming from the same source and everything is energetically connected, there is no inside and outside. It's all one. There is no mind and body. They're melded as one entity, as much as your arm is part of your body.
Right.
So when you finally realize that, you realize that even though they live in Germany and speak a different language as their first language, it's still my brother. From the
Mm-hmm.
exact same source I'm from. And that's true for any color person of any race. It doesn't matter. We're all part of the same
Right.
incident.
Right.
When you get to that, it changes you because it makes you stop wanting to destroy other life because you realize you're connected to all life, right?
Well, ultimately, everything we do it to ourselves. So if I kill someone, I kill myself.
That's right. That's right.
Right. But this is something that for many is not an experience yet because let's say we do understand this. For example, when I started doing Kundalini yoga and I got into shadow work, that means what I spoke about when I was quoting Carl Gustav Jung, yeah, the unconscious part of us is simply memory the ego is not aware of. And this memory is energized at a certain frequency, and it will attract experiences of the exact same frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So once we go energetically into our energy field and we start scanning our body, and suddenly when we feel, oh, here's a blockage, and we start meditating on it, yeah, with the third eye, suddenly we get that memory back, and then we realize.
Rolf would put an elbow right on there and say, look, give me 5 minutes while you're meditating on that and see if I can change it. It was funny. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it was hilarious.
All right.
But they're both synergistic, and it takes a lot of modalities for whatever the person needs to be healed and to find their relationship with their inside. And this is, this was taught by Jesus, by Buddha, by Confucius.
Exactly.
And ultimately, they were all saying, all these forms are just to lead you to that place where you recognize that all seeking outside yourself is folly.
Right.
It's folly.
Right. See, for example, we have a symptom in the Western world. Now everyone starts traveling. But what they don't understand, it is a metaphor for the inside travel that they're not doing.
Well, just as alchemy was a transformation from lead into gold that was given as symbology to people, to Thoth, it was a transformation from a barbarian level of consciousness to one that was made of light.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly, just for the record, I do believe that our composition through DNA and exposure to the electromagnetic field, where the finite meets the infinite, is ultimately we can be the most unmanifested energy, which is light, which is our destiny. And that's exactly what Thoth said in the Emerald Tablets. Because that is our destiny, to return to that. And then you can take on a body where you want, if you need to.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's something I would like to add, because you said you ask yourself, what's the purpose of the ego, right? You ask yourself, well, what's the purpose of limitation? What's the purpose of experience ourselves separate, experience ourselves as a person? Well, many have an idea about God, and many think God knows himself, but in truth, he does not. So the interesting thing here is that once consciousness realized it exists, from that moment on, it desired a mirror. But it had no mirror because itself, it was not an object of experience, it just was.
Mm-hmm.
So then consciousness starts dreaming, and it starts dreaming more and more sophisticated games where the illusion of separation occurs because there was a desire to love. And if you're one, and if you have no perspective, because you're ultimate, so your perspective is ultimate, non-separated, you have no object of love. But we wanted to love. So as such, we needed to create the illusion of separation so relationships became a possibility. So we go through the illusion of limitation to know ourselves, because the limitation is our mirror. This is our dignity, our poetry.
I agree. Actually, this was commented on, that was required, that limitation was required to cause the striving in this experience, so that you finally find out that we all come from the same source.
Yes.
And that happens inside, which we both agree. But all the external striving and looking outside yourself, I just want to discourage people from, growing dreadlocks and thinking you can go to Tibet and hang out in a monastery and you're going to find it. Okay. It's right where you're at. Right. But it does help to have access to these online mystics of India and all the other resources that are out there now.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's going to involve you doing the shadow work, like Julian's saying.
Yes.
And I want to add to that a little bit.
Mhm.
What I found in my practice was that the degree with which you're unconscious is the degree with which you haven't activated your chakras. Because if those energetic centers can be occupied by other information or controlling sources, which the Hindus say it was their gods at each of the 7 levels, and Thoth says it's the cycle masters at the 7 levels. Well, each one of those has little tests and things for you to move on, and it's all by design. If they control the range of consciousness on this plane of existence, which we believe has 9 parallel dimensions and 1 dimension of time, this coincides with advanced physics and the Emerald Tablets. They say exactly the same thing. 9 parallel dimensions and 1 of time. And the time one can be overcome, like you said, just by the frequency of your mind. And Thoth taught that as well. Also, in the out-of-body experience, he showed you how to leave the body, change a certain angle of your travel, and all of a sudden you've overcome the dimension of time. That's an Emerald Tablet 10. I think that's fascinating because that means dimensional travel in your out-of-body experience, not just locale 1, 2, and 3, which are essentially the boundaries to the duat, according to what he described. Right? So.
Well, the thing about boundaries and limitations is, and this is rather simple, and sometimes simple is very, very true. Any game needs rules, because if you do not have a set of rules, there is no game. So in a sense, yeah, very clearly.
I know you're saying that to me to be funny right now.
Nah.
About Odyssey Key.
I mean that. I mean that.
You're not saying
well, that is very fun, and I told you when I started reading about how you were brainstorming on designing the game, that was very funny, and I had a good laugh. Yeah, that was great.
I know. Well, now you see why. You see, yes. Our life is a game. It's a school, but it's also a very serious school too. You know, but it doesn't have to be that serious because, like you said, enlightenment in these avatar bodies, because of the way we're designed and our exposure to the electromagnetic spectrum, is inevitable.
That's right.
At some point, it's inevitable for you. It may not be this go around, but it could be the next one. So,
right. Because this is something in order to, let's say, to realize for people that they can be at ease. Yeah, because no matter what's going to happen, like no amount of anxiety is going to make a difference. Yeah, what's going to happen is going to happen, and every one of us is currently exactly in this present moment at their highest point of evolution. There is nowhere else to be, no other place, nothing else to do. Just right now is your highest point of evolution. And at a certain point, after we have, let's say, accumulated a critical mass of knowledge through several incarnations, we start remembering. It's like, you know, when a flower is growing in its DNA, even if it's small, it has the full potential of flower within itself, right? So same way, the human being has the full potential of becoming a Buddha, yeah, within himself or herself. And it is inevitable because at a certain point, through a lot of incarnations, we start breaking through the ego. We start breaking through the illusion. Our intuition becomes stronger. Our soul learns how to break the ego illusion. So, for example, for those of us who have past life memory, like you and me, for example, we reached a certain age and suddenly pop. Yeah, like there was a timer on it. When there was a certain stage of lesson reached, boom, we start awakening because we did it before. It's not the first time. So the thing is, we get more and more sophisticated the more we incarnate, and the more we're willing to embrace the lessons and to play the game. And let's not take the game serious, but let's take it sincerely. I think this is a tremendous difference. Yeah, not to fall into an extreme, because if I get serious, suddenly my ego gets back involved. Right. Gotta get enlightened, and I better do this in a week. Right? And sometimes, and this is powerful, you said, right now is where it's at. This is where you find yourself, right? and it's right in front of our noses, but it's so hard to look through the illusion if you don't know how. But sometimes right now is in Tibet with dreadlocks in a monastery.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it
exactly.
can also be in the Western world that you meet someone, for example, who is an avatar of higher awareness, who can teach you because they have past life memory of being in a Tibetan monastery, but right now are reincarnated as your psychiatrist.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so in a sense, no need for despair, because help is there if we ask for it, if we pray for it, if we meditate on it, we manifest it, we invite it into our life, ask for teachers, ask for illumination, make yourself heard sincerely,
Mm,
and those opportunities to break through the illusion will be provided to you. In fact, they're provided all the time.
right.
And this is something that Eckhart Tolle said, and that was very powerful.
I
Someone
wonder.
asked, yeah, can
I
I
wonder.
finish this quote? Can I
Yeah,
finish this
definitely,
quote?
definitely.
Yeah, because he said when he was asked, like, how do we know what experience do we need for awakening? He said very clearly, it is the experience you're having right now. Yeah, and I would add to it, yeah, this is what we're currently manifesting. Our current experience. This is our mirror. This is how we know ourselves. What you're currently experiencing in your life is mirroring back to you who you are. So this is the learning point. It's right now.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm?
What was I going to say? Something about the now. Oh, we were talking earlier about, Eckhart Tolle has wrote this book and created this gate, which a lot of
Mm.
people went through to discover what the now was. And then we talked about, well, then there's this evolution of consciousness part that sounds like a lot of work, and it's very hard, and only a few people every couple hundred years find this evolved state where they come out as, gurus or teachers, it seems. But wait, something you said a minute ago about the prayer and the asking and the seeking, this goes back to exactly what Thoth said and what Jesus said about where is that connection to the source in yourself, and how do you get it such that you're not seeking outside yourself and chanting chants and praying prayers openly. And actually, as a matter of fact, the character inside the Master of the Far East, one of the first things he said in there was, all of that is not going to get you in touch with the source. He goes, but going inside, acting like Jesus did, like this source lives in you, is part of you, as much as your arm is a part of you,
Mhm.
paying attention to it and eliciting it, whatever it takes, whether it's through prayer, locking yourself in the closet, whatever it is unique for you, is to realize how real that is.
Mhm.
Okay? Because that energy is the source of all, and it's right with you all the time. But
That's right.
we are so deluded in our heads that we're looking out everywhere else for it. So there are methods for triggering this energy that I think we ought to do another show on, and be
Mm.
real specific about how do you know that what you're talking to is not just the inside voice in your head going around, and you're not just self-deluding with this idea that you're having a relation where the finite meets the infinite.
Mhm.
Because until you've had that experience where it becomes more real than the material world,
Mhm.
it seems crazy, right? Tell me
Mhm.
I'm wrong.
Right. Well, there's something beautiful in the simplicity of, for example, Zen Buddhism, to come to an understanding of that. Because in Zen, there's a very simple principle. Do not reject anything, do not add anything. So what I'm trying to say is, you experience a certain form of manifestation currently, and it is as it is. Now, if you're in resistance to it, you experience negative emotion, or ultimately there is no negative emotion, but I'm just using that right now because this is how most people understand it. Emotion is energy in motion. Yeah, there is no bad emotion or good emotion, but let's say if you're in resistance to it, you might experience fear, anger, depression. But if you add to it, that means you add a story to it, you're also on the path of delusion. So resistance brings us on the path of delusion, but also adding story to it. And I give you a very simple example of how people get into psychosis. Because that is what we're speaking of when we're speaking about delusion when it comes to the spiritual process. Now, when we go into Zen practice, the first thing that we do, in a sense, there is this space, that is our consciousness, and we have stuffed this space full with things, and these are objects of thought, beliefs. Mm-hmm. So then, through Zen practice, we sit, watch our breathing, do not reject any thought, do not add anything to any thought. At a certain point, the thoughts start disappearing. Then consciousness itself can emerge because it's not blocked out by thought anymore. Now, the beautiful thing that then happens, then we are open to the mystical experience. And then advanced forms of yoga are available to us, like Kundalini yoga, activating the third eye. We've been speaking about that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Kriya yoga is fantastic with your breath.
All right. Right. Mm-hmm. So there are various methods. Many of them work. But let's say the trick is to reach that no-mind state first, which the Buddhists call samadhi. When you are in that state, and you can maintain it, for example, if you can sit thoughtless in meditation for half an hour, then your current belief system, your illusions drop from your mind. So you begin to see things as they are, not as you imagine them to be, not as you're interpreting them. Now, when people start advanced forms of yoga, before they can maintain no mind, that it is a frequency that we need to learn to hold. So we don't follow in that extreme or that extreme, but we hold this point here. Very calmly, the no mind state. Mm-hmm. When we are able to hold it, when we're dealing with tremendous forms of energies, when we start activating higher energy centers, then we don't get pulled into psychosis. But what happens with people when they are not able to be in a no mind state, and this is the basis, the foundation that you build your house on, this is how you transcend the ego, no mind state first. From that moment on, we can deal with those energies, because otherwise we might see something, experience something. Now the ego builds a huge story around it and starts drawing identity from that experience. That means you have trapped yourself in a new form of identity and you become psychotic. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ego is one of the trickiest, sneakiest, wiliest critters you'll ever encounter in the closet in your shadow work. Is the ego. It can convince you in your mind with thoughts of, like, it's crazy. Mm-hmm. It is your arch nemesis to overcome in this life.
Right.
I think a lot of spiritual practices knew that.
Well, here's the thing. If you make it your arch nemesis, that's dangerous.
Oh, well, you know what I'm saying. It is the largest impediment, the darkness that will be poured on your path that you have to transmute into light. And it's done intentionally.
Right. Let's say the ego is your Darth Vader that you need to learn about your inner Luke Skywalker.
That's right. It's a good analogy.
So in a sense, the ego is an evolutionary step in consciousness. And it was very, very necessary, because how else can you be amazed and joyful and blissful if you do not realize who you are, in contrast to the illusion of who you thought you were?
Well, that's exactly it. Well, yeah, exactly. But what I found is, once you find that out, you don't get to just sit in a hammock and look at the other people that are playing the game and go, well, isn't that fun for you? And I'm having a great vacation over here in the Bahamas. No. Once you reach that state, there's a responsibility that goes with that in serving the others that are part of your family. Because how could you sit back and watch what's happening in the world without being part of the solution? Because you know you are. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. And synergies, synthesis of East and West thought, science and religion are all coming together and pointing to the same state that we're in, which is in a holographic simulator that's where spiritual beings are having a material experience in a school. And it has rules, and there are rules to the game.
Right.
And a lot of those are, I don't know, captivated by people like Joseph Campbell in the archetypes, and how those archetypal characteristics for this particular hero gets them out of, an entrapped state, so they know what the exit is. And okay, if this one works for that one, would it work for me? And then all these roles that were put out there for us to play, because we each have a unique path to find the truth. And once you find it, I think then the really interesting stuff starts happening. People like you and I start meeting. We start collaborating. Our soulmates will get to meet each other one of these days if they have their hair and everything just right. Okay. No, but you know what I'm doing. The soul group starts attracting because we have been here before. We've done this before. You were a past teacher, and I think I was too. And I still have. I opened a school this year on how to integrate your body with the gravity field so you can have a higher consciousness. That's what structural integration is. So we're playing the same game. And you're an expert at brain software with the psychotherapy. And I think that's really fantastic with your perspective and how many people you can affect and help. Because it does get confusing. This ego's tricky. Right?
Yes, it is tricky. And what I realize, see, every stage of consciousness, and this is something that you also pointed out, every stage of consciousness has its traps. And those traps are not hostile to us. They are there to make sure that whatever is holding you back, that you look at it, that you transform these energies where you still have attachment, to fear or ideas of being a victim or guilt or whatever it is. These feelings or energies that we have deemed uncomfortable, that the collective ego has suppressed, these are exactly the energies that are the catalyst to increase our frequency, to realize ourselves as the light of consciousness. This is powerful. So when people, for example, they don't want to get into psychotherapy or they don't want to meditate, they find all kinds of excuses and rationalization. They are finding excuses and rationalization because they are identified with their ego, and their ego is terrified of their expansion of consciousness, because once it would, let's say when they start expanding their consciousness, suddenly the ego realizes I'm not boss in the house anymore. There is a higher form of intelligence. This intelligence takes over, and this intelligence starts undoing all the conditioning, and suddenly the deeper self, which we all are, starts emerging. And from that moment on, and this is what you describe beautifully about, like, you don't get to be done when you wake up, because when we start waking up, in that moment, suddenly compassion is born. Because we remember how painful it was to be ignorant, how painful it was to be in the illusion of the trap, so to say. So we look at our loved ones, and we look at the world, we see all this pointless suffering. And I remember something that was so simple and powerful. There was a great Buddhist teacher who went to the US in the 70s. His book is quite known. The book is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's Master Suzuki. And Master Suzuki one time got asked by a student who was really upset, walked in crying, yelling, quite hysterical, and said, Master, why there's so much suffering in this world? It's stomping his feet on the ground. And Suzuki just said calmly, no reason. Because we can stop it instantly if we choose to. If we choose to awaken to who we are, there is no need for further suffering, because the suffering is a result of us being in resistance to who we are. And so if we understand pain as our teacher and not as our enemy, there's something that I realized. Every time I experience, for example, psychological pain, it is because I am in resistance to a deeper part of myself. And if that outside pain would exist, I wouldn't look within.
Exactly.
So in a sense, it's the catalyst, it's the teaching provided to me for self-realization. So once we start embracing those energies that we have labeled Darth Vader and the evil, when we start embracing those energies, how did we know a Gandhi? We knew a Gandhi because the British Empire existed. There would be no Gandhi without the British Empire. This is how we get rid of the dualism. There is no story. There is no emergence of light if there's no illusion of darkness. So this is the beauty of the game, that all these limitations that we are in resistance to are in truth our dignity, our poetry. This is what makes the story beautiful. All of us have probably once in our life read a poem that was tremendously sad, and we felt at the same time the beauty. Because someone was speaking of the limitations that we experience. And in it, through creating something beautiful, we found our dignity, we find the creator within. Does that make sense?
No. Yeah, actually, I won't go into it, but that's the same thing that happened to me when I was reading the Brothers Karamazov as Dostoevsky, where he
Mm.
was comparing and contrasting these viewpoints from Ivan and Ilyich about some brutal king who sent the dogs out to kill a small child for throwing a rock and actually injuring one in front of the mother while it ran away. This whole concept of, the idea that it rains on the good and evil at the same time, so there's a lot of misunderstanding about the reason for suffering, what it does with the human soul, because the human soul needs some trials and tribulations to evolve. But when we see it to somebody where we say, well, this one's innocent and that one's not, and they shouldn't have, so we don't know the full extent of it all and how this all works and what that leads to. They might be reincarnated as the king and the next one, watch out.
Right. So in a sense, we all take turns.
Exactly.
And this is also where, let's say, where compassion comes from. This is something that I realized. There's something that Buddhist monks do when they see a homeless person. They are bowing to them. Why are they bowing to them, one could ask? Well, they see the Buddha in that being, and they realize there's a soul playing a very difficult challenge right now, and there's a deep appreciation for taking on that challenge, that someone expands their consciousness through suffering, right?
Right.
So once we realize, for example, when you see the homeless people on the street and you realize at a certain point, you come to an understanding, I have been them. In fact, I am them.
That's right.
You can't help but love. This is the beauty of it. When you understand, let's say one time, maybe you experience yourself as a sexist. The next round you take as a woman being suppressed by men. Right. So you get the full perspective. You get this 360 degrees of existence. And this is how we learn about love. We have beliefs and prejudices. And these beliefs and prejudices need to be challenged. And from these beliefs and prejudices, we have created identity. And then we say, oh, look, I am a victim, this suffering that happens to me. But it is actually an invitation. Look at your biases. Look at your judgment. Look how you judge other beings, how you separate yourself from those beings, even though those beings are you.
That's right.
And if you're unwilling to look, the wheel of karma turns.
I agree.
And here it gets interesting when we speak about alchemy and inner engineering, certain forms of yoga, right? When we start realizing there is an energy system within us, there are certain chakras and there are levels of consciousness. And we find blockages on these levels. When we work on these blockages in meditation, we change the energy charge of those memories. And guess what? This is an active way of working with karma. Because karma is simply energized memory working itself out. So as long as I have this memory within me, I experience this manifestation. So once I embrace it by doing shadow work and I go deeply into the painful memories. So for example, there were situations where I went into a memory, and I give an example. This is powerful, this is personal, but I like to share this. I was pretty angry at my wife once. She had certain requests, something that she wanted me to do, and I got really angry. And then I was thinking, well, the anger is not it's not appropriate with regards what she's asking of me. Why am I so angry? So I go into meditation, and I see a past life memory of mine where I'm standing in some bathroom, and I'm committing suicide. I'm cutting my arms open with a knife, and I see this. So I drop to the floor. I see myself hovering above the body and looking down. And then I see a small girl walking in, 7-year-old, and she's saying, Daddy, 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 what is happening? What I realized is my wife was that girl. She was my daughter before. I was angry at her, not because I was angry at her. I was angry at me for abandoning her in that life. So I felt guilty, and this guilt I projected outwards as anger to her.
Right.
So what I'm trying to say here is we experience ourselves as a victim to our emotional energy. This is not true. Please, people, be brave. Embrace those emotions. Take them as an indicator of there is deep memory within you where there was something that you wanted to learn about love, and you did not, and your soul was dissatisfied, so it kept that memory for the next incarnation, so it had another chance, another opportunity to fully embrace this perspective. This is what it is about. It's not a punishing round.
Right. Hey, before I lose this thought, and I'm probably going to need to let you go. I got another Zoom meeting I've got to do here pretty quick.
Sure.
Is the idea of what it means, and you say this as a therapist, but I want to go into this deeply. What does it mean to embrace an emotion? Okay. Okay. So let's put that as a mark down that, because you talk about, because we know from Eckhart Tolle's book what we're talking about in terms of being with something, not judging it, being with it until it passes. But that's hard to imagine, embracing something that's really terrible and then expecting it to pass unless you know this perspective. And we can talk more about that in another show, but I think it's really important.
Well, when you say terrible, that's already a prejudice. See, this is how we push certain experience into the unconscious, because we say that is terrible. So we're in resistance to it.
Right. And then the whole idea of resistance and persistence, and because a lot of it has to do with not resisting a thought, but not actually accepting it as your own, and distinguishing whether it's coming from the inside, the outside, whatever the influence is. Right. So, but I think that's something I want to talk with you about more, because I think people are looking for pragmatic things to step deeper in the water, like you've talked about many times. And I think maybe more of a little bit of a process initially, even though I don't like techniques very well, because I know they just lead you to the real thing. But sometimes I think people need those, especially in these complex times that they're trying to unwind themselves from.
Well, there's one very, very simple advice that I would give. And I will also tell from personal experience. I love cats, right? You love cats. And one of my cats was dying, had a lung disease. And I saw that animal suffering. So at a certain point, I wanted to relieve her of her suffering. So I bring her to that doctor, and she dies in my arms after the injection. Now, what I tried to do in that moment was not to withdraw my consciousness from my body. That means not to be trapped in thoughts about the situation, but I was going deeply into the emotion of sadness. So why I feel this loss on a physical level, I know this being has left the form and is not going to participate in this experience with me any longer. I know ultimately she's fine, but in that moment, obviously deep sadness overcame me. Yeah, because I love this creature very much. So then I go as deep into the emotion as I can, and I go out, and I somewhere in the forest I start digging a hole with a shovel, and I put her in the hole, and I go as deep into the sadness as I can. I allow it. I do not withdraw my consciousness from the body, and what then happens is very powerful. When you truly completely surrender to the emotion, you allow it and you live it. You do not withdraw into thoughts. You do not judge the situation. Then you're riding the energetic wave. And at a certain point, a wave goes up and it drops.
Right.
And when it drops, and this is powerful, there was no process of grief after that experience. Because I was in full allowance. So when that happens, your deeper self that wants to experience this, and this is very hard to understand on the level of ego. On the level of ego, there's the bias that's terrible. Things shouldn't die, right?
Right.
But when you deeply allow it, your eternal self wants to know what it is to lose someone. It wants to know, it wants to embrace this experience. If you do it fully, you do not suppress the emotion, you do not create memory that you push into the unconscious, so there is no grieving process. All right?
So that's a very good example of what it means to fully embrace something. At the same time, if you use a car as an analogy of the mind, will, and emotions, the wheel being the steering wheel where you're turning and changing the course, the emotions are indicators on your instrument panel, and the mind being the computer that's running the thing, a lot of times the indicators, the emotions, if you embrace them as and get lost in them, they can lead you away from the will that is the creator of all within you to accomplish something in the face of adversity. So there's a balance there somewhere about not, because some people are more empathic than others, but I do agree with you. And what I, as a psychologist, I would say my experience is you must allow a person to have and encourage a full range of their human emotion in order to find this catharsis, because if you don't, it gets suppressed. I agree with you totally. Well, what that full range of catharsis is for an individual may be labeled as bipolar manic disorder by the medical industry. And this is where you know what I'm talking about. I believe it is. I think exactly the way you do, but sometimes you got to go have this catharsis experience away from the public so that you can do it. And if that's what it's required, then do that.
All right. To avoid confusion here, though, when I speak about embracing the emotion and not withdrawing consciousness from the body, that means stay within the experience, stay within the sensation that happened within the energy field within your body. Then when we fully embrace it, we start transcending it. Ironically, when we fully embrace the ego in a sense that we accept it's an experience, we go beyond it. This is a form of surrender. Once you surrender, let's say, once you accept one layer of experience, you start transcending it and you go to the next layer of experience. So embracing your emotion does not mean they control you and get caught up in them. It means to be willing to fully experience and not get into a hostile attitude or in an attitude of I'm a victim to this experience.
Right.
Like, be encouraged to fully experience. But at the same time, if you stay with your breathing, for example, in those experiences, you don't get pulled into your thoughts or your emotions to the point that you lose yourself.
Right.
So acceptance does not mean to lose yourself.
Right.
It's quite the opposite.
That's what I was trying to say. You said that much better than I did.
Right.
Well, what do you think? We covered a lot of topics today. You want to take a bio break and plan our next encounter? Because I think there was a lot of good meat to that discussion.
Yeah, sure. It was great fun. We can brainstorm what to come up with next and see how it goes.
Okay. That sounds great. Okay, well, this has been Gerald Clark with Julian Polzin, once again, sharing with all you people about how to embrace yourself. We'll talk to you. We'll talk to everyone next time.
All right. Take care, Gerald.
Okay.